The lights in the briefing room were dim. Commander Daniel Grant stood at the front of the room and looked at the 6 soldiers sitting before him. They were the best he had ever worked with. They were also the only ones crazy enough to accept this mission. The holographic display behind him showed a frozen moon covered in ice and darkness. It was called Cryo 7, and it was the most dangerous place in the known galaxy right now. The Veluxy Empire had taken it 3 weeks ago. They had captured a human research station and everyone inside it. 32 hostages, Grant said. His voice was calm but serious. Scientists, engineers, and support staff. The Veluxy are holding them in the main compound. They want information about our slipstream technology. Sergeant Jake Collins leaned forward in his chair. He was a big man with scars on his hands from years of working with explosives. What's the plan? Drop in with heavy weapons and blow them to pieces? Grant shook his head. That's exactly what we can't do. The Veluxy have set up execution protocols. Any sign of a military attack, and they kill the hostages. All of them. The room went quiet. Everyone understood what that meant. This was not going to be a normal rescue mission. Corporal Amy Lynn spoke up from the back row. She was small and quiet, but her mind worked faster than any computer. What about the dampening field? I heard they set one up around the whole moon. Nothing gets through without them knowing. That's correct, Grant said. No ships can approach. No communications can reach the surface. We can't call for backup once we're down there. We're on our own. Lieutenant Nathan Cole crossed his arms. He was the team scout, a man who could read enemy movements like other people read books. So, how do we get in? Grant touched a button and the display changed. It showed a field of asteroids moving toward the moon. Meteor shower. It happens every 3 days on Cryo 7. We drop in pods designed to look like space rocks. We hit the surface during the shower, and the Veluxy sensors won't know the difference. And then we walk, said Staff Sergeant Derek Hayes. He was Grant's second in command. A soldier who had seen more impossible missions than anyone else in the room. 12 kilometers across frozen wasteland in temperatures that can kill a man in minutes. Yes, Grant said simply. Private First Class Tyler Brooks whistled softly. He was the youngest member of the team, barely 25 years old, but he could fight better in close quarters than soldiers twice his age. The Veluxy picked this place because they think no one can survive out there. They think we're soft. They think wrong, said medic specialist Megan Torres. She had saved more lives in combat zones than most doctors saved in hospitals. A medical kit was already packed and ready. Humans have survived ice ages, deserts, and the vacuum of space. A frozen moon is nothing new. Grant allowed himself a small smile. This was why he had chosen these people. They didn't see obstacles. They saw challenges waiting to be beaten. The door behind them opened, and Admiral Kate Sullivan walked in. She was a tall woman with gray hair and eyes that had seen too many wars. Everyone stood at attention until she waved them down. I won't take much of your time, she said. I just came to make one thing clear. This mission is not just about saving 32 lives. It's about saving millions. She walked to the display and stared at the frozen moon. The Veluxy think they've broken us. They think the ceasefire means we're too weak to fight back. If they find out we sent a military team to rescue these hostages, they'll see it as an act of war. The ceasefire ends. Millions die. She turned to face them. So here's your mission. Get in, get the hostages, and vanish without a trace. The Veluxy must never know humans were responsible. They must believe this was an accident, a malfunction, anything but a rescue. Do you understand? Yes, Admiral, they said together. Sullivan nodded and walked to the door. She stopped before leaving. One more thing. Dr. Lisa Mercer is among the hostages. She knows more about slipstream technology than anyone alive. If the Veluxi break her, they gain the ability to strike anywhere in human space within hours. She cannot fall into their hands. Rescue her if you can. If you can't, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. After she left, the team sat in silence for a long moment. The weight of the mission pressed down on all of them. This wasn't just a rescue operation. It was a shadow war that no one could ever know about. Grant turned off the display. We launch in 6 hours. Get your gear ready. Say goodbye to anyone you need to say goodbye to. Once we're on that moon, there's no turning back. The soldiers stood and began filing out. Hayes stayed behind until the room was empty. Daniel, he said quietly, you know the odds on this one. Grant looked at his old friend. They had served together for 15 years. They had survived battles that should have killed them both. I know the odds, and you're still going. Someone has to. Grant picked up his datapad and headed for the door. Besides, when have humans ever cared about odds? We built empires from nothing. We crossed oceans in wooden ships. We reached the stars with technology held together by hope and stubbornness. Hayes smiled slightly. The Veluxi don't understand that, do they? No, Grant said. They see our small bodies and our short lifespans, and they think we're weak. They don't understand that our weakness is what makes us strong. We know we can die, so we fight harder to live. We know we can fail, so we try harder to succeed. He opened the door and looked back at Hayes. Get the team ready. Tonight we remind the galaxy why humans are still here. Hayes nodded and followed him out. The briefing room fell dark and silent. In 6 hours, 7 humans would launch themselves toward an impossible mission on a frozen moon. The Veluxi Empire had no idea what was coming. They had made the mistake that so many others had made before them. They had underestimated humanity. The drop pod shook violently as it entered the thin atmosphere of Cryo 7. Inside, the 7 soldiers held on tight and prayed their disguise would work. All around them, real meteors were burning through the sky. Their pod was designed to look exactly like one of them. If the Veluxi sensors noticed any difference, the mission would end before it even started. Grant watched the temperature. Readings climb as friction heated the outside of their pod. Then, suddenly, they were through the worst of it. The pod's small thrusters fired to slow their descent. The ground rushed up to meet them. The impact was hard. Grant felt his teeth rattle as the pod slammed into a snowbank and skidded across the frozen surface. When they finally stopped, everyone took a moment to check themselves for injuries. Everyone okay? Grant asked. Bruised but breathing, Collins grunted. My wrist, Brooks said through gritted teeth. Think it's cracked. Torres moved to him immediately. She pulled out her scanner and examined the injury. Hairline fracture. I can stabilize it, but you need to be careful with that hand. Brooks nodded. He didn't complain. There was no room for complaints on this mission. They opened the pod hatch and stepped out into the frozen hell of Cryo 7. The cold hit them like a wall. Even through their thermal suits, they could feel it trying to steal the warmth from their bodies. The wind screamed across the ice fields, carrying tiny crystals that stung any exposed skin. Lynn checked her equipment. The Veluxi sensors didn't pick us up. We're in the clear for now. Good, Grant said. We have 12 kilometers to cover. The compound is northwest. We move during atmospheric disturbances when their sensors are weakest. Everyone stay close and stay quiet. They began their march across the frozen wasteland. The landscape was terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Giant ice formations rose around them like the teeth of some enormous beast. The ground was uneven and treacherous, with hidden cracks that could swallow a person whole. Cole moved ahead of the group, scouting their path. He had an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it appeared. More than once, he held up his hand to stop the team just before a Veluxy patrol drone flew overhead. After 3 hours of walking, they reached a ridge overlooking a frozen valley. Cole called Grant forward and pointed at something in the distance. "We have a problem," he said quietly. Grant looked through his scope and felt his stomach drop. HFY hunters. 3 of them, prowling the valley below. These creatures were not Veluxy. They were something worse. The Veluxy used them as trackers because they could sense body heat from 200 meters away. A human heartbeat was like a beacon to them. "Those weren't in the intelligence reports," Hayes said. "The Veluxy must have brought them in after we launched," Lim replied. "They're being extra careful." Grant studied the hunters. They were large, 4-legged creatures covered in gray scales. Their heads were eyeless, but their bodies were covered in heat-sensing organs. They moved slowly, methodically, sweeping the area for any sign of warm-blooded life. "Our thermal suits won't fool them," Torres said. "They can sense the heat our bodies produce, even through the insulation. Then, we need to produce less heat," Grant said. The team looked at him. They knew what he was suggesting. It was a technique humans had developed during the occupation wars, when they had to hide from alien hunters on their own planets. It was dangerous. It was painful. And it might kill them. "Controlled hypothermia," Hayes said. "Lower our core temperatures until our bodies are barely warmer than the ice around us." "That's insane," Brooks said. "We could die." "We will die if those things find us," Grant replied. "This is our only chance." Torres prepared the procedure. One by one, each team member was exposed to the freezing cold in a controlled way. Their bodies began to shut down, conserving heat by slowing their hearts and reducing blood flow to their limbs. It was agony. Every instinct screamed at them to move, to generate warmth, to survive. But humans had learned to ignore their instincts when survival demanded it. When they were ready, they moved again. Their footsteps were slow and clumsy. Their minds were foggy from the cold. But their bodies were now nearly invisible to the HFY hunters. They walked right past the creatures without being detected. Grant felt like he was moving through a dream. The cold had numbed his thoughts and his feelings. All he could focus on was putting one foot in front of the other. The compound was close now. They just had to keep moving. Collins stumbled and fell. Hayes grabbed him and pulled him back up. "Stay with me," he whispered. "We're almost there." After another hour of walking, they finally saw it. The research compound rose from the ice like a metal fortress. Lights blazed from its windows. Veluxy patrols moved along its walls. Somewhere inside, 32 humans were waiting to be rescued. They found shelter behind a large ice formation and began warming themselves slowly. Moving too fast from hypothermia to normal temperature could be just as deadly as the cold itself. Torres monitored everyone carefully, bringing them back from the edge of death 1 degree at a time. "We made it," Lynn said, her voice shaking from the cold. "We made it to the hard part," Grant corrected her. "Getting inside will be the real challenge." He looked at the compound and studied its defenses. The Veluxy had turned a simple research station into a prison. Guards everywhere. Sensors everywhere. But somewhere in that fortress, there had to be a weakness dot. There was always a weakness. Cole pointed at a small vent on the side of the building. Steam was rising from it, disappearing into the frozen air. "Thermal exhaust," he said. "It cycles every 47 minutes. When it opens fully, there's an 11-second window before it closes again." 11 seconds to get inside, Brooks said. "That's tight." "That's human," Grant replied. "We squeeze through gaps that no Veluxy would fit. We move through spaces they think are impossible. That's how we win." The team began preparing for the infiltration. In the distance, The Cathari hunters continued their patrol, searching for prey that had already slipped past them. The Veluxi inside the compound had no idea that death was crouching just outside their walls. Wearing human faces and carrying human determination, the impossible mission was about to become even more impossible. And 7 humans were ready to prove, once again, that impossible was just another word for not yet done. The thermal vent opened with a hiss of steam. Grant counted the seconds in his head. 1, 2, 3. He squeezed through the narrow opening, his shoulders scraping against hot metal. 4, 5, 6. Taurus followed right behind him. Then Lynn. 7, 8, 9. Hayes pushed through just as the vent began to close. 10, 11. The vent slammed shut behind them. They were inside. The maintenance tunnel was dark and cramped. It was designed for small cleaning drones, not for humans. But humans were nothing if not adaptable. They crawled on their hands and knees through the narrow passage, moving as quietly as shadows. Outside, Cole and Brooks waited with Collins. Their job was to create a diversion that would draw the guards away from the hostages. They watched the compound through their scopes, waiting for Grant's signal. Inside the tunnel, Lynn pulled out her hacking device and connected to the compound's security network. Her fingers moved fast across the screen. "I'm in," she whispered. "The hostages are being held in the central laboratory block. 3 layers of security between us and them. Guards?" Grant asked. "At least 40 Veluxi warriors, plus the Overseer himself. His name is Vethrak. He's a veteran of the Conquest Wars. He's smart, and he's cruel." Grant had heard stories about Vethrak. The Overseer had burned entire colonies during the war. He enjoyed making examples of his enemies. The thought of him holding human hostages made Grant's blood boil. They continued through the tunnels, climbing through shafts that went straight up and squeezing through gaps that seemed too small for human bodies. The Veluxi had never imagined that anyone would use these spaces to move around. They built their security for large, powerful enemies. They forgot that humans came in all sizes. After 30 minutes of crawling, they reached a vent that overlooked the main corridor. Grant peered through the grating and saw Veluxi guards patrolling in pairs. Their weapons were plasma rifles capable of burning through steel. One wrong move and the team would be dead before they could blink. Lynn tapped Grant's shoulder and showed him her screen. "I found the patrol pattern. Every 4 minutes, there's a gap in coverage. 18 seconds where this corridor is empty. That's our window," Grant said. He activated his communicator. "Cole, we're in position. Start the diversion." Outside, Cole and Collins went to work. Collins had planted small explosive charges at 3 points around the compound's western wall. They weren't powerful enough to breach the wall, but they would look like a reactor malfunction. Exactly the kind of accident that would draw attention. The first explosion shook the compound. Alarms began blaring. Veluxi guards rushed toward the western section, shouting orders in their harsh language. The second explosion followed, then the third. Smoke began pouring from the vents inside the compound. Chaos spread. Vethrak's voice came over the speakers, ordering his guards to investigate the malfunction. Most of them left their posts and ran toward the western wall. The corridors began to empty. Grant waited for the 18-second gap. When it came, he kicked open the vent and dropped to the floor. Torres and Lynn followed. Hayes landed last, his rifle already raised and ready. They moved through the corridors like ghosts. Every time they heard footsteps approaching, they pressed themselves into doorways or ducked behind equipment. The Veluxi ran past them without seeing a thing. They were too focused on the explosions to notice the shadows moving behind them. The laboratory block was ahead. 2 guards still stood at the main entrance. They hadn't left their post, despite the chaos. Vethrak had trained them well. Grant looked at Hayes. No words were needed. They had done this together 100 times before. Grant moved left while Hayes moved right. They approached the guards from both sides, silent as death. The guards never saw them coming. Grant's knife found the first guard's throat. At the same moment, Hayes took down the second. They caught the bodies before they hit the floor and dragged them into a side room. Lynn went to work on the security door. Her fingers flew across her device, bypassing lock after lock. The first layer of security fell, then the second. Finally, the third. The door slid open. Inside, they found the hostages. Grant had seen many terrible things in his career, but the sight before him still made his heart ache. 32 humans sat huddled in the corner of the room. Their clothes were torn. Their faces were pale and thin. Some of them stared at nothing, their minds broken by whatever the Violuxi had done to them. A woman stepped forward from the group. She was older than the others, with gray streaks in her dark hair. Despite everything, her eyes were still sharp and aware. This had to be Dr. Lisa Mercer. "You came," she said softly. "I didn't think anyone would come. We're getting you out of here," Grant told her. "All of you. Can everyone walk?" Mercer shook her head sadly. "Some of them can barely stand. The Violuxi used machines on us. Machines that reach into your mind and pull out everything you know. Several people couldn't handle it. Torres immediately moved to help the worst cases. Some of the hostages were catatonic, unable to respond to anything around them. Others were shaking with fear. Getting them all out would be much harder than they had planned. "We can't go back through the tunnels," Lynn said. "Not with people in this condition." Before Grant could respond, Hayes' communicator crackled. It was Cole's voice, tight with urgency. "Commander, we have a problem. Vethrak just sent a message to orbit. He's calling for reinforcements. Ships will be here in less than 30 minutes. Grant closed his eyes for a moment. Their timeline had just been cut in half. They were trapped inside an enemy compound with 32 hostages who could barely walk, and reinforcements were on the way. Most commanders would have called for retreat. Most commanders would have accepted that the mission was impossible. But Grant was not most commanders, and his team was not most soldiers. "We need another way out," he said. "There has to be something." Mercer stepped closer to him. "There's an underground hangar below the command center. The Violuxi keep a transport shuttle there for emergencies. If we can reach it, we can escape." "The command center," Hayes repeated. "That's where Vethrak will be. Then we go through Vethrak," Grant said simply. "Whatever it takes." He looked at his team. They were tired, cold, and facing impossible odds. But their eyes showed nothing but determination. This was what humans did. They faced the impossible, and they found a way. "Let's move," Grant ordered. "We're not leaving anyone behind." They moved through the compound in two groups. Grant led the faster hostages, while Torres and Lynn helped those who could barely walk. Hayes stayed at the back, watching for any sign of pursuit. Every second felt like an hour. Every shadow could hide an enemy. Mercer walked beside Grant, guiding them through corridors she had memorized during her captivity. "Left here," she whispered. "The stairs to the lower level are just ahead." The compound shook as another explosion rang out from the western wall. Collins was keeping the diversion going, but they were running out of time. The Violuxi would figure out it was a trick soon. When they did, all their attention would turn to the hostages. They reached the stairwell and began descending. The lower level was darker and quieter. Most of the guards had been pulled to deal with the explosions above. But Grant knew that luck never lasted forever. "Commander," Lynn said, checking her device. "Vethrak knows something is wrong. He just ordered all guards to return to the hostage area. How long until they realize we're gone?" "Minutes. Maybe less." Grant quickened their pace. The hangar was close now. He could see the heavy doors at the end of the corridor. Just a little further, and they would reach the shuttle. Just a little further, and they could escape this nightmare. Then everything went wrong. The doors to their right burst open and 6 Veluxi warriors poured into the corridor. They must have been returning from the western section. They saw the humans and raised their weapons immediately. "Get down!" Hayes shouted. He threw himself forward, putting his body between the Veluxi and the hostages. His rifle fired 3 times in quick succession. 2 of the aliens fell, but the others returned fire. Plasma bolts filled the corridor with deadly light. A bolt caught Hayes in the shoulder. He spun from the impact but stayed on his feet. He kept firing, kept moving, kept protecting the people behind him. Another bolt grazed his leg. Still, he didn't fall. Brooks appeared from nowhere, moving faster than seemed possible. His combat knife was a blur as he engaged the remaining Veluxi in close quarters. These aliens were twice his size, but he moved between them like water, striking at joints and weak points their armor couldn't protect. The last Veluxi fell. The corridor went quiet except for the sound of heavy breathing. "Hayes!" Torres rushed to the fallen sergeant. Blood was spreading across his uniform from the shoulder wound. She pulled out her medical kit and began working frantically. "It's bad," she said. "The plasma cauterized some of it, but there's internal damage. He needs surgery." Hayes grabbed her wrist. His face was pale, but his eyes were still focused. "No time. Keep moving. I'm not leaving you here," Torres protested. "You don't have a choice." Hayes looked at Grant. "Daniel, I'm right. I can't make it to the shuttle in this condition. But I can hold this corridor. I can buy you time." Grant felt something break inside his chest. He had known Derek Hayes for 15 years. They had saved each other's lives more times than he could count. The thought of leaving him behind was unthinkable. But Hayes was right. They had 32 hostages depending on them. Reinforcements would arrive in minutes. Someone had to hold the line. "There has to be another way," Grant said. "There isn't." Hayes smiled slightly. "This is what we signed up for, old friend. This is the job. Get those people home." "That's an order." Grant wanted to argue, but there was no time. More Veluxi would come any second. Hayes was already positioning himself at the junction where the corridors met. From there, he could cover both approaches. He can hold them off just long enough. Torres pressed a pistol into Hayes' hand. Her eyes were wet with tears she refused to shed. "Give them hell, Sergeant." "Always do," Hayes replied. Brooks stood frozen, staring at the man who had trained him since he was a raw recruit. "Sergeant, Go, kid. Make it count." Grant forced himself to turn away. He forced himself to lead the hostages toward the hangar. Every step felt like betrayal. Behind him, he could hear Hayes checking his weapons, preparing for his last stand. They reached the hangar doors. Lynn worked on the lock while the others watched the corridor behind them. In the distance, they could hear shouting. The Veluxi had discovered the empty cell. They knew the hostages were gone. Then the shooting started. The sound of Hayes' rifle echoed through the lower level. Shot after shot, precise and deadly. He was holding them off. He was giving them the time they needed. The lock clicked open. They poured into the hangar. The space was large and cold. A Veluxi transport shuttle sat in the center, sleek and alien and beautiful. 2 guards stood near it, along with a Keth Ari hunter. They turned toward the humans with weapons raised. Cole, who had slipped in through a maintenance hatch, took the shot. His silenced rifle dropped the hunter before it could sense their heat. Brooks and Collins charged the guards, taking them down in brutal close combat. "Clear," Collins called out. They ran for the shuttle. Lynn climbed into the cockpit and began examining the controls. The navigation system is locked. I can't override it. Let me try. Mercer pushed past her and sat in the pilot's seat. Her hands moved across the alien controls with surprising confidence. I helped design hybrid propulsion systems before I was captured. Veluxy technology isn't that different from ours. She worked fast, fingers flying across panels that glowed with strange symbols. Behind them, the shooting continued. Hayes was still fighting, still holding, but the sounds were getting closer. Got it, Mercer announced. Navigation unlocked. We can fly. They loaded the hostages as fast as they could. Torres took a final look at the corridor they had come through. The shooting had stopped. The silence was worse than any sound could have been. We have to go, Grant said quietly. Now, the shuttle's engines roared to life. The hangar doors began opening, revealing the frozen sky outside. Veluxy soldiers burst into the hangar just as the shuttle lifted off the ground. They fired desperately, but the shots bounced off the shuttle's armor dot as they rose through the opening. Grant looked down at the compound one last time. Somewhere down there, Derek Hayes had made his last stand. He had fought alone against impossible numbers, giving his life so that others could live. Collins sat at the weapon controls. Commander, the charges I planted are still active. One signal and the whole compound goes up. It'll look like a reactor breach. Grant understood. If they detonated the charges, there would be no evidence of a rescue. The Veluxy would think their prisoners died in an accident. The ceasefire would hold. Millions would be saved, but it would also destroy any trace of Hayes. There would be no body to bring home. No grave to visit. Just ashes and silence. Do it, Grant ordered. Collins pressed the button. Below them, the compound erupted in flames. Fire consumed everything, erasing all evidence of what had happened. The Veluxy reinforcements arriving in orbit would find only wreckage. They would never know the truth. The shuttle broke through the thin atmosphere and headed for the edge of the system. Behind them, Cryo 7 burned. Ahead of them, the stars waited in cold silence. Grant sat alone in the back of the shuttle. He didn't cry. Soldiers didn't cry. But he let himself remember. He let himself honor the friend he had left behind. Derek Hayes had died so that others could live. That was the human way. That was why humanity survived. The shuttle flew through the darkness of space at maximum speed. Behind them, Veluxy warships had arrived at Cryo 7 and found nothing but wreckage and fire. Their angry transmissions filled the communication channels, demanding answers that no one could give. Grant sat in the co-pilot's seat next to Mercer. She flew the shuttle with steady hands, her eyes fixed on the navigation screen. Despite everything she had suffered, she was still calm and focused. It reminded him why the Veluxy had wanted her so badly. How are the others? He asked. Torres is doing what she can, Mercer replied. Some of them will need months of treatment. The Veluxy machines, they don't just take information. They break something inside you, something that's hard to fix. Grant nodded slowly. He had seen victims of Veluxy interrogation before. Some never recovered. Some spent the rest of their lives jumping at shadows. Will you be okay? He asked. Mercer was quiet for a long moment. I don't know. I held out as long as I could. I didn't tell them anything about the slipstream technology, but I came close. So close, her voice cracked slightly. A few more days, and they would have broken me. But they didn't. You held on, because I knew someone would come. She looked at him with eyes that had seen too much. I kept telling myself that humanity wouldn't abandon us, that someone out there was fighting to bring us home. Was I foolish to believe that? No, Grant said firmly. You were right to believe it. We will always come for our people. Always. Lynn's voice came from the back of the shuttle. Commander, I'm picking up a friendly signal ahead. It's the horizon's edge. They're waiting for us at the system's edge, just like we planned. Relief washed through Grant. They had made it. Against all odds, they had actually made it. The stealth carrier appeared out of the darkness like a guardian angel. It was huge and gray, designed to be invisible to enemy sensors. The shuttle bay doors opened, and they flew inside, landing gently on the deck. Medical teams were waiting. They rushed forward as soon as the shuttle doors opened, carrying stretchers and equipment. Torres had done amazing work keeping everyone alive, but many of the hostages needed help she couldn't provide. Grant stepped off the shuttle and watched as the hostages were taken to the medical bay. Some of them were crying with relief. Others were too damaged to understand that they were safe now. A young scientist grabbed Grant's hand as he passed. "Thank you," the young man whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on us." Grant couldn't find words to respond. He just nodded and let the medical team take the man away. Admiral Sullivan was standing at the edge of the landing bay. Her face showed no emotion as Grant approached, but her eyes told a different story. She knew. She always knew. Staff Sergeant Hayes? She asked quietly. "He didn't make it, Admiral. He held the line so we could escape." Sullivan closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, they were hard as stone. His sacrifice will be remembered. Not publicly, not officially, but by those who matter. The Veluxi? They're investigating the compound right now. Our intelligence suggests they believe it was a reactor malfunction caused by their own engineers. They have no idea we were involved. Grant felt a strange mix of satisfaction and sadness. The mission had succeeded. The ceasefire would hold. Millions of lives would be saved because the Veluxi never learned the truth. But the cost? The hostages who didn't make it mentally, Grant said. What happens to them? The best care we can provide. For as long as they need it. Sullivan put her hand on his shoulder. You did something impossible tonight, Commander. You and your team walked into hell and brought 31 people home. 31, Grant repeated. The number felt wrong. It should have been 32 hostages plus his entire team. Instead, they had lost Hayes. They had left him behind on that frozen moon, fighting alone until the end. I need to tell you something, Sullivan said. Something most people will never know. She led him to a quiet corner of the bay, away from the bustle of the medical teams. The Veluxi Empire has conquered 17 star systems. They have technology that makes ours look primitive. They have numbers that we can never match. By every measure that matters, they should have destroyed us years ago. But they haven't, Grant said. Gobble quotes, no. They haven't. And do you know why? Grant shook his head. Because they're afraid of us. Sullivan's voice was intense. They won't admit it. They tell themselves that the ceasefire is temporary, that they're just waiting for the right moment to finish us off. But deep down, they know the truth. Humans don't break. We don't surrender. We don't accept impossible odds. She gestured toward the medical bay where the hostages were being treated. Tonight, you proved it again. You walked through their security. You survived their frozen wasteland. You vanished without a trace. You did things they believe no species should be able to do. It doesn't feel like a victory, Grant admitted. Victories rarely do. But it is one. Not just for the people you saved. For all of humanity. Sullivan stepped back and looked him in the eyes. Get some rest, Commander. You've earned it. Grant found his way to the observation deck. The stars stretched out before him, endless and cold. Somewhere behind them, Cryo 7 was still burning. Somewhere out there, the Veluxi were searching for answers they would never find. Cole found him there an hour later. The scout looked as tired as Grant felt, but there was a quiet peace in his eyes. Torres says everyone is stable. Some of them are even talking now. Asking about their families. Good. Cole stood beside him, watching the stars. You know, when I joined this team, I thought I understood what it meant to be human. I thought it was about being tough, being strong, being the best. And now? Now I know it's about something else. It's about not giving up. It's about fighting for people you've never met because they're your people. It's about... He paused, searching for the right words. It's about being willing to die so that others can live. Grant thought about Hayes, standing alone in that corridor, rifle raised against impossible numbers. He thought about Torres, working through her exhaustion to keep the hostages alive. He thought about Brooks and Collins and Lynn and Cole, all of them putting their lives on the line without hesitation. That's what the Veluxi don't understand, Grant said. They think strength comes from power, from weapons, from size. They don't understand that true strength comes from connection, from caring about something bigger than yourself. They'll learn eventually. Maybe, or maybe they'll keep underestimating us until we've beaten them so many times they have to accept the truth. Grant turned away from the window. Either way, we'll be ready. He walked toward his quarters, leaving the observation deck behind. The mission was over. Hayes was gone. 31 hostages were safe. The ceasefire would continue. Tomorrow, there would be reports to file and debriefings to attend. Tomorrow, there would be new missions and new challenges. But tonight, Grant let himself believe that they had done something good, something that mattered. They had vanished without a trace. They had reminded the galaxy that humanity was not to be underestimated. And somewhere in the darkness, the Veluxi were wondering what else humans were capable of. They would find out soon enough. The stars continued to turn. The universe continued to spin. And humanity continued to survive, just as it always had. Not because humans were the strongest. Not because they were the smartest. But because they refused to give up. Because they fought for each other. Because that was what it meant to be human.